Good morning. My name is Joe Palin, and I am your worship leader today. Before I start, I want to mention that a few people asked me why I took on doing a service right after shoulder surgery, and while preparing this week, I've been asking myself that same question. And I came to the realization to not make important decisions while under the pain reliever oxycodone. Actually, I'm really grateful to be here today. I'm grateful for Tom's help. I was out of town last week, and he put in some time putting together this service and the gifts that we shared as we prepared. The title of today's service is Gifts in Motion. I will share this in words, poetry, and a 19th century folktale, all to inquire about what it may mean to keep the gifts in motion by not attaching, not knowing, without ownership, and to consume in a different way. The opening words today are a poem by Mary Oliver titled Storage, and I'd like to share that with you now. When I moved from one house to another, there were many things I had no room for. What does one do? I rented a storage space and filled it. Years passed. Occasionally I went there and looked in, but nothing happened. Not a single twinge of the heart. As I grew older, the things I cared about grew fewer, but were more important. So one day, I undid the lock and called the trash man. He took everything. I felt like a little donkey when his burden is finally lifted. Things. Burn them. Make a beautiful fire. Make room in your heart for love. For trees, for the birds who own nothing, the reason they can fly.
This isn't in the order of service, but I'll be playing Ashokan Farewell.
Our words today are by a poem by Mary Oliver titled Luna. In the early curtains of dusk it flew, a slow galloping, this way and that way, through the trees and under the trees, I live. In the open-mindedness of not knowing enough about anything, it was beautiful. It was silent. It didn't even have a mouth, but it wanted something. It had a purpose. And a few precious hours to find it. And I suppose it did. The next evening, it lay on the ground like a broken leaf and didn't move, which hurt my heart. Which is another small thing that doesn't know much. When this happened, it was about the middle of summer, which also has its purposes, and only so many precious hours. How quiet, and not with any assignment from us, or even a small hint of understanding. Everything that needs to be done is done. Actius luna, or the Luna moth. This is what I believe Mary Oliver is referring to in her poem Luna. From the poem, in the open-mindedness of not knowing enough about anything, it was beautiful. It was silent. It didn't even have a mouth. The adult Luna moth doesn't have a mouth. After it emerges from its cocoon, it lives for about a week. Its sole mission in life is to mate and lay eggs. If you've never seen one, they are beautiful, with light green wings, a long tail, and a wingspan of approximately 5 inches. Personally, I find the life of the I find the life of the Luna moth, I have a month written here, that's what messed me up, a simple one, with no attachments, with no need to look for food, unknowing in what is right or wrong, what is good or bad, what is best or not best. It simply gives the gift of life to another, that in turn will give its life to another, and so on. Our lives, or at least my life, has not been so simple. I mean, with me having a mouth, I have more choices. Omnivore, vegetarian, vegan, and if I eat something out of my desired choice, am I no longer that? Am I getting enough or not enough calories, enough protein, too much salt? To me, this seems like a lot just for having a mouth to feed. Friday evening, I was invited to a friend's house for dinner, and for the first time, and this was the first time I'd been to his house to eat, and I found my only choice of food was a ground beef tater tot casserole. Now, because of my practice, I've stopped eating meat, so I had a choice to make. I chose to eat the casserole and accept the gifts of the preparer and the food. Now, I do realize this was an easy choice, but I also have experienced moments when the waters were much more turbulent, and where to recognize and trust the most compassionate way to flow was much more difficult. Getting back to Mary Oliver's poem Luna, there are two things that strike me. The first is time, the short and precious time we are here. And the second is not knowing or even a hint of understanding of what needs to be done to keep the flow of life going. And if this is true, what am I doing to stop the flow? In terms of time, Katagiri Rashi describes our time as we are always fading away. In describing the life of a thistle growing along the side of a highway, he writes in the book Returning to Silence, if we look at the human world, we don't know what will happen. The thistle is beautiful now because it is fading away, but we don't know when it will be gone. Its life is constantly going in a dangerous situation, that is being beside the highway. Nevertheless, the thistle must find its own life refreshing. And this is beauty. The beautiful Luna moth fades away in a week. Do we see it as beautiful because of its short time here? Like freshly cut flowers that are beautiful? And are they beautiful because we know they will also soon fade away? Or is it that they never stray from being beautiful, not knowing when they'll fade away? Our lives may appear longer than the Luna moth and cut flowers, but we soon find out it too does pass by quickly, as I believe Mary Oliver sees this when she summons up the trash man in her poem Storage. This brings me to the second item of keeping the gifts flowing freely. In the poem Stores, does she let those things go completely to fly freely? Or do these things continue to be present and there's something else that takes the weight off our wings in the midst of all these things? Reflecting on these questions, I was reminded of a book I was introduced to titled The Gift by Lewis Hyde. It was recommended I read chapter 1, which was the only chapter I read in the book. And that chapter is titled Some Food We Could Not Eat. In this first chapter, the author points out the difference between the gift being consumed by moving through one hand to another versus stopping the flow through ownership, as in our commercial Western culture. To illustrate this, the author Lewis Hyde shares the following folk tale. And it's a little long, but if you'll indulge me. The title is The Girl and the Dead Man. Once upon a time, there was an old woman, and she had a leash of daughters. One day, the eldest daughter said to her mother, "It is time for me to go out into the world and seek my fortune. I shall bake a loaf of bread for you," said the mother, "to carry with you." And when the bread came from the oven, the mother asked the daughter, "Would you rather have a small piece and my blessing, or a large piece and my curse?" "I would rather have the large piece and your curse," replied the daughter. And off she went down the road, and when night came wreathing around her, she sat at the foot of a wall to eat her bread. A ground quail and her 12 puppies gathered near, and the little birds of the air. "Wilt thou give us part of thy bread?" they asked. "I won't, you ugly brutes," she replied. "I haven't had enough for myself." "My curse on thee," said the quail, "and the curse of my 12 birds, and thy mother's curse, which is the worst of all." The girl arose the next morning and went on her way, and the piece of bread had not been half enough for her. She had not traveled far before she saw a little house, and though it seemed a long way off, she soon found herself at its door, and she knocked, and heard a voice cry out, "Who's there?" "A good maid seeking a master." "We need that," said the voice, and the door swung open. Now the girl's task was to stay awake every night and watch over a dead man, the brother of the housewife, whose corpse was restless. As her reward, she was to receive a peck of gold and a peck of silver. And while she stayed, she was to have as many nuts as she broke, as many needles as she lost, as many thimbles as she pierced, as much thread as she used, as many candles as she burned, a bed of green silk over her, and a bed of green silk under her, sleeping by day and watching by night. On the very first night, however, she fell asleep. The housewife came in and struck her with a magic club and threw her, and this killed her dead. And she threw her in the back. She threw her out back in a pile of garbage. Soon after that, the middle daughter said to her mother, "It is time for me to follow my sister and seek my fortune." Her mother baked her a loaf of bread, and she too chose the larger piece over the mother's curse, and what happened to her sister also happened to her. Thereafter, the youngest daughter said to her mother, "It's time for me to follow my sisters and seek my fortune. And I'd better bake you a loaf of bread," said her mother. "In which would you rather have, a small piece of my blessing or a large piece in my curse?" "I would rather," said the daughter, "have the smaller piece in your blessing." And so she set off down the road, and when the night came wreathing around her, she sat at the foot of the wall to eat her bread. The ground quail and her 12 puppies and the little birds of the air gathered about. "Wilt thou give us some of that?" they asked. "I will, you pretty creatures, if you will keep me company," She shared her bread, all of them ate their fill, and the birds clapped their wings around her until she was snug with warmth. The next morning she saw the house a long way off, and here the task and the wages were repeated. She sat up at night to watch the corpse, sewing to pass the time. About midnight, the dead man sat up and screwed up a grin. "If you do not lie down properly, I will give you a leathering with a stick," she cried, and he lay back down. After a while, he rose up on one elbow and a screwed up grin. And then the third time he sat up with a screwed up grin. And when he rose the third time, she walloped him with a stick, and the stick stuck to the dead man and stuck to her hand, and off they went. He dragged her through the woods, and when it was high time for him, it was low time for her. And when it was low time for him, it was high time for her. The nuts were knocking at their eyes, and the wild plums beat their ears, until they both got through the wood, and they returned home. The girl was given the peck of gold, the peck of silver, and a vessel of cordial. She found her two sisters and rubbed them with the cordial, and brought them back to life. And they left her, the third sister, sitting there, and she said to herself, "And if they were well, 'tis as well. And if they were not, let them be." In the remainder of the first chapter in the book, these four gifts are pointed out. The bread the mother shares is the first gift. The second, the third daughter, keeps that gift in motion by sharing the bread with the birds. And here we are introduced to the fruits of the gift when the gift is passed on. And the fruits of the gift were the girl and the birds are relieved of their hunger. The birds befriend her. And after eating and getting a full night's rest in the warmth of the bird's care, she's able to stay awake the next night with the dead man and endure the highs and lows and the pounding of the wild plums and nuts. And as we witness, the two older sisters didn't have enough food or energy to do so. The third gift is the cordial, which is a vial of healing liquid. And she, the third daughter, keeps this gift going by giving her sisters life. And she lets them be without attachment or ownership. Upon my own reflection, I also find the third sister's selfless in her actions, accepting and trusting, of giving and receiving the flow of life, and that there's no other, and that we are all in this together. We also get some insight when the gift is not allowed to move on. The author points out, it is not just the mother's curse that gets the first two girls. The night birds give them a second chance. And one imagines the mother bird would not have repeated the curse had she been met with generosity. But instead, the girls try to dam the flow, thinking that what counts is ownership and size. The effect is clear by keeping the gift they get, no more. They are no longer channels for the stream, and they no longer enjoy its fruits, one of which turned out to be their lives. In regard to the flow of the gift, if we think of the gift as a constantly flowing river, we may say that the girl in the tale who treats it correctly does so by allowing herself to be a channel for its current. In the folktale, the mother gives the bread away, the third daughter then gives it away, and she no longer controls it, nor expects any repayment. The gift is consumed and not owned or used as in our commercialist Western culture. The consuming takes place when it moves from one hand to another, and from another hand to another, with no assurance of anything in return. Likewise, the moon aloft participates in the flow of life without a small hint of understanding and without ownership. It keeps the gift of life flowing, and in its death, there's nothing left to own. The adult Luna moth perishes for the life it has given away. Can I, with a mouth, do the same? To realize my participation in eating, not as a thing to do or be, but rather a thoughtful participation in the cycle of life. And I wonder what area of my or our lives can we apply this to and keep our gifts in motion? What can we have the trash man take away to lighten our load so that we too can fly with the birds that own nothing? So may it be. Our closing words today is a poem by W.S. Merlin, and it's titled The Present. As they were leaving the garden, one of the angels bent down to them and whispered, I am to give you this as you are leaving the garden. I do not know what it is or what it is for, what you will do with it. You will not be able to keep it, but you will not be able to keep anything. Yet they both reached at once for the present, and when their hands met, they laughed.